I want to give you two scenarios. Scenario number one, a plane crashes. Scenario number two cars collide. In scenario number one, we pull out all the stops. We bring in the NTSB, we try to figure out exactly what went wrong. Scenario number two, we send out the cops, we sweep up the mess and we go on our way.
If we collectively, everyone on this call and the broader Strong Towns movement, if we do this right, we are going to save thousands of lives.
Mayors and local council members want to do the right thing. They have the ability to solve it. We're going to help provide those tools for them.
Hi, everyone who is joining us for this event. Thank you so much. We'll get started here in just a minute. I know Chuck wanted to make some opening remarks to our Strong Towns members that are participating in this. So yeah, go ahead, Chuck.
Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate everybody who's here today to watch this inaugural episode of the Crash Analysis Studio. I just want to let everybody know what we're doing here. This is because we're doing this in this format through Zoom Live. This is kind of being treated as an episode. Kind of, you can think of it as a webinar if you want, or we've been thinking of it as a show we are producing. You know, what we're doing here is very serious work, and it is work that we are trying to have communities across the country copy. This is our inaugural episode. We expect some hiccups and some things to be awkward. We just found out one right now that we have our crash actually, we all thought it was coming from a different way because the police report was different than what the on-site people are telling us, but we'll work that out. But I want you to recognize that what we're doing here is not entertainment. What we're doing here is something and that has two hopeful takeaways. The first is we want people to watch these and say, wow, this is a really novel, important, innovative way to look at crashes. This is an impactful way for us to approach a crash, particularly a fatal crash or a traumatic crash. This is really important that this be done, particularly when you compare that to the way we do it today, which is to go out and clean up the mess and point blame at somebody. What we're going to do is very important. The second thing that I hope people on this call are able to do, and people who ultimately watch this, is say, I could do that, or my community could do that, or the people around us could do that. And so what you're going to see, and I said this to our team here, this is not about razzle dazzle. It's not about entertainment. We're not trying to do anything really high tech. When you see the slides that I put together, you're gonna be like, wow, that's like the boringest slideshow you've ever done, Chuck. Yes, because we're trying to do something here that is, in a sense, clinical, because we're trying to create a model that people can use around the country. So thank you, Rachel, for allowing me to say that.
Thanks so much, everyone. So I'm Rachel Quedno. I am the program director at Strong Towns, and I want to welcome you to the first Strong Towns Crash Analysis Studio. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our expert panel, but first let's talk about why we are here today. Last year, over 40,000 people died in car crashes in the United States. Hundreds of thousands more suffered traumatic injuries, and despite the best efforts of public safety officials, these numbers have been increasing. All of our lives are impacted. There is a prevalent misconception that car crashes are caused solely by mistakes that drivers make, looking at your phone, changing the radio, speeding, even drinking alcohol. And when a crash occurs, the American response is typically to send out law enforcement and insurance agencies to assign blame. Who made the mistake? Who are we going to blame for this? The reality is that crashes are caused by multiple factors, not just driver error. When a traumatic crash occurs, we need to identify all of the contributing factors and learn what we can from these experiences so that we can reduce the number of deaths and traumatic injuries in our communities. What you're going to see now is a crash analysis studio. Drawing from the best practices of the medical profession, we've convened a panel to review a crash in Indianapolis, Indiana, where a driver hit and killed someone on a bike. The goal is not to assign blame. It is to learn as much as possible about what happened and identify the factors that contributed to this unfortunate incident. Before we go into the particulars of this crash, hear from our panel of experts and start talking about this, we need to begin with the fact that this tragedy resulted in the death of a friend, a colleague, an advocate named Frank Radaker. Please take a moment of silence with me to honor and acknowledge Mr. Radaker and the loss of his life. Thank you. So I'm now going to bring in our panel of experts for today and invite them to come turn on their cameras and let's meet them. So we'll start with Connie Schmucker, who is the Advocacy Director at Bicycle Garage Indy, a bike shop based in Indianapolis. She is the one who brought this crash in her hometown to our attention, particularly because Frank Radaker was a fellow employee at Bicycle Garage Indy. And Connie is very familiar with the intersection where this crash occurred. So Connie, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Matt Duffy is an engineer for IndyGo, Indianapolis's public transit agency, as well as a volunteer in the community. Matt has experienced this intersection where today's crash took place by car, by bike, and by foot, and he lives nearby. For about 6 months, I'm told he also gave the county recommendations on how to reconfigure this intersection and visited the crash site and observed it from a professional perspective. Next on our panel is Damon Richards. He's the executive director of Bike Indianapolis, a local bike advocacy organization, and he regularly rides the Monon Trail, which crosses the road where the crash took place. And he's navigated this intersection many times on bike as well as occasionally by car. Melanie Alliston is Tool Design's civil engineering practice director. She's based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Melanie is a project manager and civil engineer with more than 3 decades of experience in civil infrastructure projects. And we're bringing her into this conversation as an expert in civil engineering. Charles Marone, who you met at the start, is the president and founder of Strong Towns, civil engineer and author of the book Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, Transportation for a Strong Town. And he crafted the initial idea for this studio. Finally, we have Edward Erfurt, who's the director of community action at Strong Towns. He is a trained architect and passionate urban designer with over 20 years of public and private sector experience, and he has a keen eye when it comes to evaluating the safety issues posed by roads and intersections. I'm now going to hand it over to Chuck Marone to go over the details of this crash in Indianapolis.
Appreciate that, Rachel. I put together a little presentation so that we were all on the same page in terms of the facts. I understand just from our discussion, we've spent a lot of time and there's a lot of stuff that's been submitted. A lot of my presentation here relies on the police report. So I'm going to try to supplement it with some other screens here in a couple of places where I now understand it may be an error. So let's go through this. From the police crash report, this fatal crash occurred at the intersection of East 86th Street and the Monon Trail at 8:26 in the morning. The police report indicates that the skies were cloudy, but the roadway surface was dry. The driver was traveling west along East 86th Street in the left lane. The victim, the police report says, was traveling north, but we have our people here who are indicating that they think that the police report is incorrect, that the victim was actually traveling south along the Monon Trail by bike. The victim actually commutes southward, and so there's a strong likelihood that that is actually the case, not what the police report indicates. The driver crossed through the intersection and struck the victim on the far west side. We put together a little schematic demonstrating this. The vehicle is in yellow. The bike is in orange. Let me indicate this direction of travel by the bike is the one in the police report. Some of our panelists are saying that they believe that the police report is wrong, that the bike would actually have been driving south through this intersection instead of north. That makes some sense. The vehicle would have been traveling this way, so cross the entire intersection. I apologize for the trauma of this event and the detail here, but the vehicle would have traveled through the intersection. The cyclist would have ended up being struck and projected down further on 86th Street, whether they came from the north or from the south. The police crash report, the driver claims that the traffic signal was green when they entered the intersection. There were 3 witnesses in the police report that indicate that the signal was actually red. A couple of them were in the lane behind the driver that entered the intersection. One was an observer on the side. The police crash report indicates that the primary factor in this crash was a disregard of the signal. There's no indications that there was any impairment from alcohol or drug use for anybody involved. The driver was administered a blood test. The overall site conditions, East 86th Street is a strode environment. The lanes are 11 feet wide. The enforced speed limit is 35 miles an hour. There's frequent intersections along this strode. Turn lanes are there to facilitate through traffic. Here is an overall view from Google Maps of the site. East 86th Street is the yellow that runs through here. The crash is roughly in this location right here. Here's a view of 86th Street, the way that the driver would have been going. You can see the signal in the distance there. That is the site of the crash. The Monon Trail is the backbone of a regional trail network. Again, here's East 86th. Here is in orange then the Monon Trail. This is a significant regional trail, carries a lot of trail traffic, accessing all these adjacent neighborhoods. Again, here's our crash site. This is what the trail looks like to the south of the crash site as you're heading into this intersection. Here's what it looks like from the north. It's a significant enough trail that Google actually went out and filmed the whole thing. So there's good photos of the entire thing. The overall site conditions, the land use pattern on East 86th Street is auto-oriented. There's a collection of anchor stores in this area, drawing people from the region: Targets, Marshalls, Whole Foods, Kroger, the Northview Mall. There's also a collection in this specific area of drive-through businesses: Starbucks, Hardee's, Jimmy John's, Taco Bell, Steak and Shake. Around here, there's office parks, various retail office uses. There's a high school, middle school, YMCA, other kind of public uses. You can see the overall general land use pattern, again, in relationship to the crash site. Surrounding this particular site, you have predominantly residential type of uses. This is zooming out a little bit from the crash site here. Here is a map showing the platting and the layouts in the area, typical suburban auto-oriented style of development with the crash site located right about here. We were able to do a preliminary speed study. That study indicates that a significant number of automobiles traveling through this intersection are traveling at fatal speeds. We're referencing the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety report that states once you start to get over 20 miles an hour, you start to see an increase in fatalities. Over 30 miles an hour, you see dramatic increases. When we look at this, the posted speed limit is 35 miles an hour. We did not see any speeding during our speed study. The 85th percentile speed was 25 miles an hour. But again, going back to the Insurance Institute study, a significant number of the vehicles were traveling at speeds that would be fatal if you struck someone on a bike or someone walking. The approach to this intersection from an automobile standpoint, there's a center concrete separation median, not a median that offers any refuge for someone on foot or bike, but wide enough to create a physical separation between the travel lanes. There's 2 lanes of traffic moving in each direction. There's multiple access points along this strode with in and out turning movements, but no crossover movements except at the signalized intersection. There's sidewalks directly adjacent, electric poles adjacent to those sidewalks, and then the typical turf, and then some trees that are medium height adjacent to the sidewalks. Here's what the conditions look like as you're heading towards the intersection in an automobile. This is where a little bit I'm going to flip over to a different screen because The trail merges here onto 86th Street. I had shown the south side. If the bike was coming on the south side, this is what that would have looked like. Let me flip over here and show just from Google what it looks like from the north side, which has some similarities. This is the north side condition. You can see that little fence along the south side there. Here's what it looks like as an approach from the north. The intersection itself, from the automobile standpoint, there's left turn lanes in both east and west approaches. So the approaching traffic will be crossing in front of you in that left turn lane. In your direction of travel, the turning traffic will get out of the way. So there's a certain amount of throughput. The center concrete separation median diminishes. It's still there for a while and then it goes away. There are 2 lanes of traffic moving in the same direction. The Nora Corners access point has a very wide curb radius and a very generous approach for automobile travel. The north access is designed to accommodate 2 vehicles in each direction. There's a total of 85 foot in access width there. Here's a kind of schematics of the intersection in terms of its size. You can see the 85 foot wide crossing area with the 2 entrance at 24 foot, exit at 28 foot coming through there. You can see the 11 foot lanes, travel lanes. Here's what this looks like from an image standpoint. Again, continuing on with the intersection conditions for the automobile driver, the sidewalks in this area start to blend in with the driving surface. There's no crosswalks on the east side, so that would be the near side as the driver entered the intersection. There is a crosswalk present on the west side, the far side of that intersection. The signage, there is a pedestrian sign or like a lookout for pedestrians that's hung from a wire above this intersection. Those electrical poles that we see are still present here, and the traffic signals themselves are hung from wires. So this is what that looks like. You can see the pedestrian sign there hung from that wire, and then the signals themselves. The conditions for the trail, you've got 70 feet of total crossing with, again, no refuge. There's 2 lanes of through traffic in each direction, 1 lane of left turning traffic. The crosswalk is present on that west side. There's a permission button on the pole that is coordinated with the signal. We did have some video of these intersections, and it's a very, very long, excessive wait time for someone on bike or on foot, especially in inclement weather conditions. Here's what that intersection looks like. The police report suggests that the person would have been traveling from the left of the screen to the right. The panelists here from this neighborhood are suggesting it would have been the other direction from what you're looking at, the right to the left. Here's what this looks like looking north. And that's it. Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you, Chuck. So now we're going to go to our panel of experts here and start talking about what you all consider to be factors that played into this crash in the built
Can I ask
environment.
one quick question about the intersection first? Do we know which lane the driver was in? Right or left lane, westbound?
The driver was in the left lane. Yep. I mean, the police report suggests that the driver was in the left lane.
Yeah, thanks. So Connie, let's start with you. What sort of factors do you consider that played into this crash? And my colleague Tony is going to be taking notes as we speak, so we can track all these.
Part of it is, as you approach the intersection as a motorist, you have no idea that there's a major trail crossing there. There's some minimal signage. There's 1 crosswalk. It just looks like a crosswalk. And there's, over 1 million people who use the trail on a yearly basis. So there's a lot of people who use that. And it's a major bike commuting route as well. So you get a lot of bike commuting traffic in the morning and evening. So I think, part of it is lack of awareness of the motorists to really watch for anybody crossing.
Yeah.
So signage is one thing. The photos predate, actually. There are a couple of changes that have been made to the intersection, pretty minor, but there are no turn on red signs that have been added. at 3 of the 4 approaches to the intersection. And there is now a trail user phase only part of the signal phases. But most people who have used the trail for the last 20 plus years have no idea that there is a trail user only phase. And so a lot of times when the light turns green for the north or southbound parking lot entrances, the trail users will go because
Got it.
they don't realize that they have, if they push the button, they will get their own phase.
So we have a bike trail that's highly used, intersecting with this very busy road, and people who are driving are not aware of the trail. They don't, or they forget about it, and they're not paying attention and recognizing that there might be people trying to cross.
Yeah, and there are 2 signalized intersections very close to this signalized intersection as well.
Okay.
So it's, it's a very busy, there's 35,000 cars a day. There's a lot of traffic that flows through there, but there's also, part of the reason why the people didn't get up to speed when the speed study was done was because they got stopped by the previous lights.
Right.
And really not a lot of room for them to get up to speed before they get to this intersection.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you, Connie. Let's go to Melanie and ask again, what factors are you noticing that contributed to this crash, especially in the built environment?
Okay, so I don't know if somebody can bring up, first I wanted to see kind of the overview photo of the intersection. This particular intersection has a particularly long sight distance to that traffic signal.
Thanks, Chuck. Yeah.
Melanie, where would you like me to zoom in here?
So I want to see the whole area between Westfield and the trail crossing.
Do you want me to drop in so you can see it from the ground, or is you want to
Let's
see it in
show
this?
the aerial first,
Okay.
because I want to show you where the sight distance starts at. So normally when you're looking at sight distances, the rule of thumb that we use as a quick check is 10 times the posted speed, which in this case would be 350 feet. But as you saw on the graphic with the dimensions, this shopping center entrance and this intersection is 85 feet wide, just the crossing. The traffic light above the crosswalk is about 100 feet from the stop bar where the vehicle would normally need to stop. So that adds another 100 feet, putting the sight distance point almost back at Westfield Road. And so if you want to drop in kind of, yeah, right about there, you showed this, what the driver sees, but you can see that they really can't see that signal and certainly can't tell whether it's red or green from the point where they need to start slowing down to stop. You can also see there's a lot of visual clutter around here. So there are signs in front of those traffic signals up there. They don't block them, but they do, distract from them. Chuck, if you could go up close to the intersection too, I think part of what may play into this is a maintenance issue. First of all, these are pretty old looking traffic signals. They lack the black plates around the outside of them that make them more visible to drivers. But they also seem to lack the wire under the bottom of them that holds them in place. And you can see that the one on the right even is tethered to the nearest pole with a wire that just stops at that signal head, and it's crooked. If the wind is blowing and the bottom edge of those things are loose, it's going to turn the traffic signal potentially away from the way a driver would see it. In this case, knowing that a lot of wind travels from west to east, it would blow those signal heads toward and up, toward the driver and upward. So, something like that could have played in as well. So there's a lot of different things. They also, that push button for the cyclists and pedestrians who are traveling from north to south is in a location where typically a pedestrian especially might not even notice that it's there. And as from what I could tell from the videos that folks took, is that you have to push the button to call the pedestrian signal. And so would it be safer if the pedestrian signal came up automatically in this location? So there's, a lot of different things, but the one thing in kind of looking at the data that was collected afterwards, don't forget to go out and take the bigger picture view and go to the extents of the sight distance for the drivers and for the cyclists when you're looking at things, and look at everything between those far extents, not just the immediate area of the intersection.
Got it. Yeah, so a lot of issues with sight distance to the traffic signal, visual clutter that would prevent people from noting that the light was red. You also noted some maintenance issues. Maybe those have been fixed since those images were taken, but yeah, lots of issues with drivers not seeing the traffic signal properly. So Damon, let's go to you. I know that especially you have used this intersection from the perspective of someone on a bike. So maybe that plays into your perspective, but can you tell us what factors you see that contributed to this crash?
I think Melanie hit on a big one. Is there's an incredible amount of clutter for a driver in that section of 86th Street. And when they're worried about other motor vehicles coming in and out of those different driveways, they're less concerned about seeing pedestrians or cyclists. They're looking for something coming fast. That's a problem. This is as Connie talked about, this is a really, really heavily used trail. But unfortunately, here in Central Indiana, people who don't use the trails just really don't know where they are. And so a lot of people that are driving through there frequently aren't aware that they're crossing a pretty important part of our greenway system. So that it, I guess, reduces the amount of attention they pay.
Got it. So lack of awareness about the trail, drivers paying more attention to cars intersecting from those parking lots instead of paying attention to somebody that might be on foot or on bike.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Edward, let's go to, yeah.
Sorry, Rachel, to jump in on that, just to give people more context about the one on trail. As you head, this is in Indianapolis, but as you head to 96th Street, which is one of the next major cross streets up, and you have a big interstate there, a lot of these crossings are grade separated. And so you don't have the conflict at all further north, but this is an area where you don't expect to see a lot of pedestrians, and generally people are looking out for vehicles, except for the one on trail, where, as people said, there are a lot of users here. And so I think it does catch people off guard, where you and oftentimes people have this experience, right, where you're walking down the street and car almost runs you over, and they didn't even see you, right, because they're not expecting you, because on most of their trips they don't see people walking or biking, and that's pretty common in this area of the city.
Got it. Yeah, Matt, why don't you keep going? What other factors do you see that played into this crash?
Oh, sure, yeah. I think one thing, and I apologize if you mentioned this, Melanie, but
No,
the signal heads themselves, typically you want one signal head per lane of travel, and so having another through traffic signal head and then a left turn signal head specific would be advantageous here. And then another item to note is backplates on the signal heads. Indiana Department of Transportation usually will put backplates on the signal heads, and the city does that sometimes at certain locations. So that would
you clarify for those who don't know what was a backplate?
So a backplate is sort of a border around the signal heads that has a reflective strip on it, and it just sort of makes the signal head pop a little bit more in contrast with the environment behind it.
Got it.
And studies have shown that they are more visible and easier to spot. So in Indiana, they do a black backplate with a yellow reflective strip around the border. Some other states just do black around the signal head itself. It just kind of depends. So those are a couple things that could draw more awareness to the signal itself. And as Melanie mentioned, it's very close to other adjacent signals and easy to lose that with everything else that's going on. One other thought.
This is the kind of thing you're talking about, right, man?
Yeah, yep, exactly.
As opposed to, you can see the signals up here don't have that. They're just the can without the, it's like having a picture frame that
Yep.
brings it out a little bit. Yeah, I didn't, okay, very good.
Yep.
Thanks.
Another thought on the crossing itself. I know that the city has implemented new timings, which I think is a lot better for the trail crossing, where it limits the permissive turns across the trail, which is common for a lot of pedestrian crossings. And they did install the no turn on red, but again, that's one of those things where everyone kind of points to, if we just had no turn on red, then we wouldn't have this conflict at all. But you still need the person to follow that regulation, which oftentimes doesn't happen either. And this is a spot location in a very auto-oriented area where maybe on someone's entire drive, they go through 10 to 12 intersections, signalized intersections, and maybe none of them, or in this case, one of them has a no turn on red. And so it just kind of makes you question what the compliance would be, or if they even notice it, if they're used to that number of intersections where there is no turn on red regulation there.
I'm going to jump in a little bit. We did a citizen-led traffic study, and with our 5 hours of non-overlapping video, there were 91 instances of people turning on red,
Even with the signs.
even with the signs, and 11 people running red lights. So that's 2 an hour, and 44 encroachments of the sidewalk, meaning the trail users had to go around the cars because they were blocking the crosswalks.
Thank you. Yeah, that's good to know. Edward, let's go to you. What factors did you notice from your perspective on this crash?
Yeah, so when I'm looking at these intersections, I'm looking at it from the urban design perspective, and I'm looking at it for the experience that people are having, and probably a little bit bigger perspective than maybe we would look at the individual intersection. So looking at this condition, this intersection, as you're approaching it, because this is about the point that you'd have to realize that the light is either red or green as you're going through the intersection. No matter how many signs you put here, the built environment of these driveways are all telling you to go faster and get on or off the road as fast as you possibly can. Your perspective here, and the retail folks like Taco Bell, and I think there was a Steak and Shake, they all get where the driver's eyes are. They're all up here where all the wires are. It's up high. So there's nothing here focusing you down to the street. And you can see, again, I maybe am catching the traffic light. I'm definitely not catching anybody in the intersection. And it's reinforced in this particular intersection because right in the center for the pigeons and the hawks is where the pedestrian sign is. It's not in the lower area where I'm expecting to see a pedestrian. So from an experiential environment, your eyes are in the wrong place. And looking at land use and why is there so much traffic on 86th Avenue and why would there be this type of speed in the overlap? I like to look at these places in kind of what I call X-rays or a CAT scan. And I have to look at it without all the noise on it. So I'm looking at the cross streets and I'm looking at the network. And I found I could, on this small area, well, actually not small, but within this spectrum, I could only find one east-west alternative outside of 86th Avenue. I had to actually go out much, much further. So if you just draw on the roads where all of the contributing network is, you can see that we're pushing all the cars into these 4 cross streets in this multi-mile range. So we're forcing a lot of cars in one area because there's a lack of network. And that results in these giant super blocks. So all of the traffic and needs to get in and out of these locations have to go to these intersections. So if we just look at the site, this is really now a little more clear when you get down to the site level. because things aren't connected. So within this, you can see on the right where known as corners is this entire parcel. To get from here to Hardee's or here to Aldi, you have to get in your car and go out on 86 or out on Westfield. You actually can't get through, it's blocked. You also have driveways right next to each other. They do the same thing. And if they were combined or removed, you could yield out more parking and more development in these locations. So observationally, frankly, I'm surprised that cyclists aren't going the break through here when we see these. But again, here's another break where there's.
Ed, are you moving yours? Are you showing something beyond the one PDF that you've got up?
Yes.
Okay, because we're seeing the one PDF crash X-ray final, and it shows yeah, there you go. Now we're seeing more.
Okay. Yeah, so looking at these aerial views, again, the site along the corridor, all of the focus is to the top. All the focus is up. When you look at the street network within this area and we focus on the crash location, as we look at this, there's only 2 cross streets in this view. So you really have to go and zoom way out to be able to see where all these cars are coming from. And granted, 35,000 cars is a lot, but not for the, frankly, low density in this location. But it is a lot when you only have one east-west connection for this whole distance of true contributing network. And you could see the super blocks then that form within that network, just around this crash site. And zooming in on the site, we can begin to see where that network doesn't exist. And I can begin to see, as I start to overlay, locations of where known as corners is, again, completely isolated. And that there are, it's great that you have one, two's really bad. So you end up with two of the same type of entry points in and out. Closer to the trail, you can also see there's another driveway out where, again, this would be an area that I would think be high risk for the cyclist at this area related to the crash. But as we look on this short stretch, there's a lot going on that does not focus you on where the bicyclist coming across this trail would be. And trying to increase connectivity and reduce clutter, I think would really help at this location.
Thank you, Edward. Yeah, so there's a ton of volume of traffic being funneled into this area, a lot of clutter, a lot of driveways intersecting with the street that are all contributing. Chuck, do you want to add anything in terms of factors you observed that haven't been mentioned yet?
Most of what I had written down has been mentioned. I think everybody's brought up some the most salient points. I think maybe I'll start where Edward was ending, which is kind of like a macro view of this. I wrote down, I think putting this trail and this major roadway intersecting this way, just from a overall planning perspective, is very reckless. Edward said you have limited connectivity. I'll say it in a different way. You funneled all the traffic to one east-west corridor, and you funneled all the bike traffic to one north-south corridor. And that was done intentionally. I mean, these were major investments over multiple decades to do this. The idea that you wouldn't have some awareness of how the intersection of those two would be done with great care is just reckless to me. Like, I don't know how you get to that point. A couple little technical things. As we're moving along East 86, and I will share my screen. We've talked a lot about the clutter, and I think the clutter to me is one of the proximate factors. It's one of the big things here. But if you're a driver in the left lane, you're getting the signal here that, everything is all clear. You're going through multiple signalized intersections. But you are getting essentially being told by this design that all is good. Like this place is set up for you to not have to worry about conflicting traffic. They've taken out the crossovers. So you essentially have on that inside lane, on that left lane in this direction, you essentially have something that's designed to function very much like a highway, higher speeds through traffic. Let's get that turning traffic out of the way. There's not going to be any crossover traffic. When you combine that with the way that all of this electrical line clutter just kind of blends into the traffic signals, it all kind of seems like one thing you can just zone out. And I do think that that is the kind of primary thing here, is that you had someone who was driving along who every subliminal factor in the design was telling them not to worry about anything, that there was nothing in their way, nothing that they should be concerned with. And all of the devices that were put in to try to signal something the opposite of that were blended into the background. So with that, I will end. I think everybody else has brought up all the points I was going to bring up in a really productive way.
Thank you. All right, so here's the factors that we've discussed. This is a brief summary, but a huge one that was brought up: lack of awareness that the trail is there, and related to that, any lack of signage that would tell drivers there's a trail crossing here. Another issue that was discussed at length was visibility issues. So the traffic signals don't pop for drivers. There's the sight lines from farther back are not, it's not easy to see the signal. There's visual clutter that is distracting people from noticing that the signal might be red. And generally there's just a lot to look at that would prevent you from noticing that a person is crossing the street and that you need to stop for them. So a lot of different visibility issues. There's also some maintenance issues brought up, and those may or may not be resolved, but that the signals are old, the design is outdated, and things like that, that would contribute to people not, again, noticing that they need to be stopping. Volume of traffic and the way that the street network is funneling people in into these just a very few set of intersections means that a ton of people are driving through this area. And then to round us out, as Chuck brought up, that we're also funneling this trail traffic into this area, and not necessarily not great planning in that regard, having that much cycling traffic intersecting with that much car traffic. So I'd like to go around to everyone and just ask you to, as you think about these factors, again, the lack of signage, visibility issues, maintenance issues, the volume of traffic, the street network, what for you is the number one thing that contributed to this crash from your observation? What's that primary factor? So I'm going to start with Connie and just ask, what are you seeing as, if you could point to the biggest, most significant factor here?
Well, since the motorist was in the left lane, Frank coming from this, from the north to the south, wouldn't see this vehicle approaching the intersection. They would have been hidden by the other lane of traffic. So, having people be aware that there is a trail there, although people know about the Monon, if anybody knows the name of any trail in Indianapolis, it's the Monon. Whether they know that that's where the Monon crosses 86th Street is another story, but the Monon is like the icon of greenways in Indianapolis, and it's a Hall of Fame trail from the Rails to Trails Conservancy. So it's well known, but this crossing obviously is not necessarily well known. So I think, making it more visible to everyone, so people know how to find it and all that.
So lack of awareness that that trail is there and making that really clear to drivers especially. Melanie, let's go to you. What would you identify as the most significant factor here?
Well, in addition to what Connie said, I think too, it's creating distraction for drivers, again, with all the visual clutter, with the signals that are not very visible from where the driver needs to begin stopping. We've manufactured some of those distractions in the way that this intersection is configured, so. And, as Edward pointed out, drawing the driver's eye upward instead of to the crossing where the bicyclist or pedestrian would be, is another, part of that distraction.
So a lot of distractions for drivers. Yeah, thank you. Damon, let's go to you. What would you say seems like the biggest, most contributing factor here?
That when they designed the Monon, they didn't spend the extra money to put in a bridge or tunnel. Everybody who's ever been involved with this recognizes that these two flows of traffic should be separated. You saw all those power lines, those are high voltage power lines, so getting those moved in order to make a bridge gets really expensive. And as soon as you start going under in an urban environment, you just rack up prices. So the decision to build that intersection the way it was built is really the problem.
Okay, so yeah, just having those two flows of traffic intersecting with each other in the first place. Okay, Matt, let's go to you. What would you identify as the most significant factor here to your mind?
I think that crashes like this, it seems to be a symptom of the way that people routinely drive their cars on through environments like this, right? Where they have no idea the risk that they are exposing to people outside of their vehicle. And, to that matter, to other people in other vehicles as well. It's just that they are less susceptible to that danger. I mean, you can jump in a car with somebody and go on a street like this and they can get up to 40, 50 miles an hour. And, I often sit in the passenger seat and will observe how people drive just because I'm curious. I don't say anything. I'm not commenting on it. I'm not being a backseat driver, but I'm just curious, genuinely, how do people, when they are comfortable, when they don't see the risk in front of them, how do they drive? And a lot of people have no idea. They just are not aware. They're not expecting it. And I think most of these crashes, like that, I'm sure the driver who killed Frank here just feels terrible, right? And this was not intentional. I would be my guess. And so, like, the big factor here is that they are not able to assess the risk while they are traveling at certain speeds where they need to make a quick reaction. And that varies from person to person, and the older you get, and it's harder to assess that risk and that perception. And we're putting people in really challenging situations, I think, in times like this, where you run a red light and you could kill somebody, right? But people don't think about it in terms of that way. So I don't know. I think the biggest factor is that people are complacent when they drive, and they don't understand the danger that they're posing to others on the road. And that's because of the way that the roads have been designed. And they can't, I don't think we can put the onus on the driver, which often happens, right? Mistakes happen. Everybody is prone to mistakes. But limiting the severity of the mistakes is the goal, or should be the goal, right?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Ed, real quick, do you have a primary factor that you would identify in your observations of this crash?
Yeah, I want to build on what Matt's saying, and I think it's more than complacency. And I don't know how to say this in a polite way, so I'm trying to think about this more in a clinical way. There's a lot of apathy at this intersection. There's apathy in the way it's been designed. The distance of this intersection is the same dimension as Westfield. So when you come to 86 and Westfield and you look at those intersections, there's an expectation of a driver that that's what you're going to see. There is no reason at this intersection for the two cross streets that come off the shopping center cannot be 2 lanes, that the turn radius there can't be tightened up. This is standard practice that's done everywhere else. You can see it can be overlaid with ADA could support this. The bike pedestrian could support this. Traffic engineer could support that. So that the experience on this, again, I don't know how you get to 35 miles an hour, and I don't know how you justify posting 35 miles an hour when it's that distance. So that's where I want to be real frank and cold about it, because I think that there are a lot of really bright people that have looked at this. When I looked at the police report, it states the driver didn't even know she hit somebody until they were on her windshield. So there was absolutely no expectation of that. And even Frank, I mean, as I think some folks have described, he's an avid cyclist and is fully aware of the conditions out there. So the conditions for both, just it's not set for this. And I think there are some things that could be changed, and I'm excited to hear and see how that occurs there. But I would push it a little bit further from complacency to really apathy, because there's an opportunity to build for the end result that you want at this intersection. And I just don't think the exercise has gone to know what it is, and that's why there's so much confusion and overlay here.
And Rachel, if it's okay, I've got one thought, and I'll keep it brief, but there's a reason that the crossing doesn't line up with the trail itself, right? Because they decided that it would be better to have a signalized intersection at driveway access points to these developments versus prioritizing, and then fitting in wherever this trail crossing is, versus prioritizing the trail crossing itself, which if you put it right in line with the trail, you don't have the driveways next to it, so you don't have turning traffic to worry about. You just have through traffic. So you could still have somebody run a red light there. Of course, that's still a risk.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I understand that, but where I look at is, okay, so we brought the trail to an intersection, and right here, this doesn't meet any standard. It doesn't meet ADA. I mean, it's not safe where the cyclist is at. And I think if you zoom back on some of the street views on this, you can see where the cars roll up over this. So this has been designed, again, not for the car, not for the bicyclist, not for the pedestrian. It's just kind of leftover space. And that's where I think there's more than just
Yeah, I want to speak to that a little bit as well. I don't know if you can get a view of looking north, but the crosswalk does not line up with the sidewalk. So where the cars are driving, they're crossing right where the crosswalk is. When they're turning right, there is absolutely no space for a trail user to, what I call, stage themselves in front of the crosswalk. They're going to get hit by a car turning right. You have to be closer to where the crosswalk signal is. And that's where you stage. And so they're coming out. You have to basically come out into the roadway in order to hit the crosswalk.
Got it. Thank you. Chuck, if you want to add any comments about contributing factors, and then
in terms of
recommendations.
In terms of this particular crash, to me, the primary factor is, and I'm going to agree with Matt and with Edward, but maybe say it a little bit differently. The speeds that are facilitated through this corridor, through this intersection, are just way too dramatic for the intersection of a trail. And I think apathy is a good way to state it. As Edward said, you lull the driver into a sense of security as you bring them through this very dangerous place that has been engineered to create the conflict. But ultimately, it's the speed at which people are entering this intersection in automobile that both magnifies that the danger, but also interacts with that clutter and that apathy to create the dangerous situation. So to me, it's the primary factor is the speed that's being facilitated.
So now we'll move into something that we've already started talking about, which is recommendations that might be considered to improve this intersection and make it safer for everyone. Connie, again, let's start with you. What recommendations would you offer that might contribute to making this a safer place?
Well, ultimately a tunnel. Even if we had dollars tomorrow to build the tunnel, it's going to be years before it will be built. So I've been working on, with a number of people to do a tactical urbanism project this year for this intersection, for this crossing. And part of that is to put some information in the pavement itself as you're approaching. So put the Monon logo and trail crossing words. And ironically, when we were doing the speed study, I noticed that they did used to, a long time ago, it's been faded, have ped crossing in the lanes as you were approaching the intersection. There's just bare remnants, but you can see that they actually did do that at one point. Put those in, extend the curbs in all four directions, put crosswalks on the north and south sides of the road as well, because there are a lot of kids and students that come from North Central, just west of there, and come from Westfield and go to the Monon Trail, and people on either side of the road head towards the trail, and there's no crosswalks at that intersection except for the trail crossing. I was going to put it on all four, but it was pointed out to me there's no signals on the east side of the intersection, so I don't want to encourage people to cross where there's not a crossing signal. And then just we're working with an elementary school that's nearby to work on a mural on the sidewalks that lead from the trail to the intersection. I think it's telling that in the elementary school that's very close, it's on 91st Street in the Monon, they will walk down the Monon to 86 and turn around. They will not take their students across that intersection. So those are the things we're looking at, doing some bump outs. I don't know if there's enough space to do pedestrian refuge in the middle of that intersection, but also extending the crosswalk so it's wider. When you get people going from north to south, trail users multiple times, and you've got bikes and walkers and runners crossing at the same time, the width of the crosswalk that exists is nowhere close to what it needs to be. It needs to be extended farther west, I guess, or farther into the intersection, one way or the other. But anyway, those are what we're looking at doing with the with our tactical urbanism. Also, signal timing, making the signals so that they are more visible, and doing something to make people more aware of the no turn on red signs, which are really small and pretty obviously are getting ignored anyway, but that's what we're attempting to do anyway with our permit. Ideally, stuff will we'll get the permit, we'll be able to do the project this year, and some of that stuff will be go into some kind of permanent solution until we get a tunnel.
Yeah. Thank you, Connie, and really glad to hear about the changes you all are actively working on. Melanie, any recommendations that you would add?
So I like what Connie said, and I would start with a technical urbanism kind of project or something that can prevent something like this from happening tomorrow. But then also, seeking out the funding for the changes that you want needs to start today, or it's going to be another 30 years. And so, working through kind of a multi-phase plan of improvements and, particular things that I would also think about here, lower the speed limit to 25. There are intersections pretty close on either side of this. There is absolutely no reason for it to be posted at 35. I know the slide with the measurements showed 11-foot lanes, but actually moving them or measuring in Google Earth, that looks like that doesn't include the gutter pan. So there's a little more space there. So stripe it, just do it with striping, but narrow those lanes down to about 10 feet, get some pedestrian refuge in the middle. And a couple of the videos that were taken, I saw people getting stuck in the middle in a very dangerous little 2-foot space. Those are things that we can do today. And then in the larger sense, I would first look at replacing the signal heads, getting those back plates around them. They look like they are the older incandescent bulbs, which get dimmer over time. Replace them with LEDs so they're more visible. Just making what's there visible, get rid of some of the signs that are up on the wires and put them at ground level where they should be. The tunnel, I agree that, with the volume of bike traffic and the volume of car traffic through there, you need one, but don't also neglect the fact that there are attractive destinations like fast food restaurants and schools that are generating kids who like to eat at fast food restaurants. You are going to have people who want to cross at grade there, and they're not going to use a tunnel because they have to go 500 feet away to slope down to get into the tunnel and slope back up. People are lazy. And so, making sure that they can cross safely at grade is still important. So I would encourage you to not forget that part as you go forward as well.
Yeah, great points. Thank you, Melanie. Damon, what recommendation would you offer to improve this intersection?
Well, I'm all in for the tunnel. And you make a good point, Melanie, and we wrestle with that. Another major crossing for the Monon is at 38th Street. And at 38th Street, we put in a bridge, and there was a big discussion about what about those folks who want to access things on 38th Street. And we did end up having an at-grade crossing in addition to the bridge. So it's possible to get to the stuff that's there. And I would assume that the same process will happen here, but the majority of the users of the Monon don't get off at 86th Street because just a little south of there is the village of Broad Ripple, where all that stuff is available in a much more walkable and bikeable environment. So getting a tunnel, I think, is a critical piece to solving this problem. In the meantime, I think the efforts that Connie's leading to do some modifications to that intersection will help a lot. And then it goes back to what we talked about a lot earlier is we need to create more awareness of the importance of this crossing to drivers on 86th Street. I just don't think enough of them are aware of what they're crossing. Even though, as Connie said, you told them that's the Mona, and they go, oh, I know what that is. But I've dealt with enough folks here in town to know that knowing of it and knowing where it is, completely different concepts.
And can I just give you one follow-up point too, because it alludes to what you were saying and what Connie talked about with that art project. Giving people visual clues that this is a people space and not a car space is going to be really important.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Matt, would you add any recommendations to this list so far?
The only thing I'll add, I think I completely agree with the speed change. I think that's something comprehensively that the city needs to look at, and that's just a whole tangled web of a mess, right? Is speed management on corridors like this. And Melanie, I really like how you put that, making people understand that it's a space for people and not necessarily for cars. But to that end, one idea is just to add planter boxes to block off the right turn lane in the southbound direction coming out of the driveway. They're limiting that to one lane, so that way you have vehicles that are a little bit farther away from the crossing, and when they finally cross the pedestrian crossing itself, the vehicle is more straight on, so it's just a higher, if they are going to turn right on red, a higher likelihood that they'll see somebody crossing there. And then also work with the private development there, the bank on the northwest corner, to potentially block off the driveway. Looks like you can still maintain circulation on the site, put planter boxes there. That way you don't have that driveway conflict where people using the Monon are getting around to the crossing on 86th itself.
Yeah, one of the things that we have in our draft plan is to put planters, as Matt has suggested, as well as cross or take out that that entrance and exit of the bank that crosses the sidewalk that's connecting the Monon to the intersection.
Just as a way to draw people's attention to the crossing itself and take them out of that complacency that we've talked about.
Yeah, thank you. Edward, any recommendations to add to this list?
Yeah, so a lot of my experience has been working in small towns, way smaller than Indianapolis, with way smaller budgets, where all of these conditions existed. And when I look at this particular intersection, I would look at the things that could be done really almost tomorrow. And I joke about it where it can be done with paint. It can be done with paint, flower boxes. It can also be done through maintenance. So anywhere that you can go and get one of the driveways consolidated or removed off of this section. So again, you remove some of those conflicts, you should do. My experience has been, normally if you talk to a lot of these property owners, there's something else that they need or think they have a shortage of. And by removing that, it improves their condition. The other thing is the entranceway to all of these shopping centers. With what I've heard today of about how many people have run the red light and how many people are not paying attention to the right turn on red, it only leads me to believe that there needs to be a reduction to all of the entranceways to these shopping centers. And frankly, an in and an out is all that's needed. And for a lot of these retailers, that will help to drive. So it'll help to drive traffic in front of the shops. It can be done through a maintenance program. You know, I look at all this stuff, all these curbs have to be replaced at some time. You can start with paint, start with some movable objects. Those are things I would be putting in right away. The other thing, talking about the Monon as a Hall of Fame trail, it's far from at this intersection. It's really far from. And again, putting some of that in the wayfinding and the experience here, so that is at a scale that the cars understand that they're in an area, by lowering the speeds, building it so that they drive those speeds, and then providing some of those celebratory things that make this place special, I think can be put in there. All of those. And the fundamental thing that will make this successful, my recommendation, is to get as many partners involved. So we've talked about property owners. There's an opportunity to include public arts. There's opportunity to involve bike ped and trail folks. There's opportunity to involve the schools. Again, these are the things that provide in these projects. The more hands-on that you can get to the awareness of this, it will help the drivers that drive through here and the cyclists that ride through this intersection understand that this can be a more compact urban walkable area. And with some really simple improvements, you will start to yield those results. And I would encourage all of that to occur.
I want to speak a little bit to partnerships. We have enlisted the NORA Alliance, which is Alliance of Neighborhoods and Businesses in the NORA area. And they applied for a grant from the State Department of Health for our tactical urbanism project, which we got approved. And they have been doing a lot of reach out, but because of that application, we had a letter of support sign-on letter that had 15 different organizations. And then we had Indigo signed on, had a separate letter of support. The state senator for that area has a letter of support. So there is a groundswell of community partners who are very interested in seeing this project and seeing this intersection improved.
Yeah, I would get them out there on a walking audit. I would put them in this intersection. I would bring them all there because the things that we've observed today, 95% of that is maintenance. And they're things that if you're all there, they start to see that. So the shopping center realizes, hey, we're repaving next year. Melanie and I did a project in a small town where we had to fix a entrance to a shopping center. And we did a road diet. That would be the best terminology for it. And it resulted in an acre of pavement being removed. You're probably pretty close to that with some of these driveway areas. And what that resulted, the bottom line, is it saved several $100,000 in new construction. It was actually cheaper to do the right thing than to put back what was there. So when you get the folks out there and you experience it, the partnership is about that experience. They realize this is really ridiculous. I didn't know I had to stand in a turn lane to cross the street. How can we fix it? Well, we don't need two 14-foot lanes into our shopping center. We could do one. So those are the things that I would encourage you to keep pushing. And I hope through the Technical Urbanism Project that you get the opportunity to invite those folks ahead of time to see how bad it is today. And then with your minor changes, they can see how that little bit of effort can result in significant improvement in this area.
And when you do your walk audit, bring a wheelchair.
Good advice. Chuck, anything to finish this up? I know we're running over on time. I
Yeah.
apologize
Well,
about that.
I feel like there's two things. I want to go back to what Matt had said earlier about the back plates on the lights. I mean, I do think that part of making this intersection work is actually recognizing that with all of the aerial visual clutter, there's a responsibility to make those signals really stand out and really not be something that could be easily overlooked. Whether that, if they're going to stay hanging, there's got to be some kind of a back, backing on it to make them stand out. I think if you're going to have it be a signalized intersection, you really need to make the investment in a pole there and have it go over and make it, much more visible for people. I think the other thing, and I respect, the other panelists here, I'm not on Team Tunnel. I get why, from a recreational standpoint, if you're a through traveler, a tunnel would be great. But the reality is that you have a lot going on here, and this intersection is not safe for people on foot. It's also not safe for people in a vehicle. I know that there are a lot of vehicle-on-vehicle crashes that happen in the same intersection. Somehow going back a distance and tightening this thing up. Melanie said narrow the lanes. I think that's an absolute prerequisite. I think also, as this place is reconstructed, widening out that refuge, tightening things up, so that as drivers are traveling this part of the corridor, the signal that they're getting is that I've got to be more heightened aware. I need to naturally slow down. I need to have a greater awareness going into this intersection. Is just going to augment all the things that everybody else has brought up.
Thank you so much. We'll close out here with some gratitude. Thank you, Connie, especially, who nominated this crash for our discussion and helped provide many of our materials. Thanks to my colleague, Tony, who's been working behind the scenes, and to all of our panelists today for contributing your insights to this conversation. Thank you also to our sponsor, who's an anonymous donor. You can find a recording of this session and all of our crash analysis studio sessions by going to strongtowns.org/crash-studio. And you'll also find resources soon there for starting your own crash analysis studio in your community. On behalf of my colleagues and our panel, thank you for watching this session. Keep doing what you can to build a strong town. Take care.